Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for this wonderful turnout. Nothing so inspires a speaker. See a good turnout, and thank you so very much, Dean Starr, for that terrifically generous introduction. I have been called a legend, but it's generally he's a legend in his own mind. And so I appreciate your most generous comments. Vice Chancellor Warder, thank you for your hospitality here. Dr. E., my new friend. I think our little match here was made in heaven or something. And to Hank and Gloria, I'm honored to be speaking in the auditorium named after you and your family. And I guess I should say, fellow shareholders. Because I'm sure we have, I don't need a show of hands, but my imagination tells me there may be quite a few of you here. It's delightful. This is my first visit to Pepperdine. I'm overwhelmed and delighted and excited to be in this magnificent part of the country. It's hard to believe it's in smoggy, old, crowded Los Angeles, but it's really just a delight in every way to be out here. I've spent a lot of time and thought on the challenge of measuring up to Dr. E's high appraisal of my career, his appraisal of the scores of speeches that I've delivered over the years. He actually has read a lot of them, and especially my 2005 book, The Battle, The Soul of Capitalism. To find the battle on the same reading list as the Odyssey, let alone on the same planet, adds even more to my burden of living up to, particularly your expectations, but I hope the expectations of the audience this evening. I couldn't help thinking that the combination of the battle and the Odyssey might be something like a combination of the sacred and the profane, which is a great theme of Renaissance art. But 2 weeks ago, I didn't know quite what to say tonight, but 2 weeks ago, an article in the Arts and Leisure section of the Sunday Times gave me what I thought would be a unifying theme for tonight's lecture. This article was about someone whom I think most of you students may be familiar. His name is Brad McQuaid, and he is creator of EverQuest, a 3D fantasy game, video game, operating in the virtual world with 500,000 players, each paying $15 a month for the privilege. Not as popular as the champion, the World of Warcraft, 5 million players, but pretty amazing in its own right. Typical of my generation, alas, I am not among those players. But my constant attempt to understand what appeals to today's young citizens, and particularly you students in the audience, and my effort, however unlikely to bear fruit, to understand the new virtual world. I did read that Times article from start to finish, and it was about Mr. McQuaid's new virtual game, Vanguard, Saga of Heroes. Well, of course, the new game has nothing to do with, quote, my quote, Vanguard, that little investment firm that I created way back on September 24th, 1974, nor is the story of Vanguard a saga of heroes, save, I think, for the multitudes of heroes numbered among our 12,000-member crew who deserve so much credit for their loyalty and commitment. This philosophy is not new to me. Long ago, I've expressed these words of Helen Keller, which say it better than I could. I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish humble tasks as though they were great and noble. The world has moved along, not only by the mighty shoves of its heroes, but also by the aggregate of the tiny pushes of each honest worker. It is these crew members, we don't like the word employees, who have dedicated themselves to serving, quote, in the most efficient, honest, and economical way possible. It's a phrase I'll use later on in the talk. Serving the now 20 million honest-to-God, down-to-earth human beings, each with their own hopes and fears and financial goals, another phrase I've used for as long as I can remember, who have entrusted Vanguard with the stewardship of their investment assets. And surely heroes must describe those legions of investors who came aboard the good ship Vanguard in the early years of our existence, often without ever seeing a real person, sometimes without hearing a real voice, or looking up our credit rating on Dun & Bradstreet. They sent their checks in to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, 19482, first in small amounts, and then in the millions, and then in the billions. And I believe these early believers in Vanguard's mission are also heroes for giving us their blind trust. In return, they're enjoying their fair share of returns generated in our financial markets. I'm confident they would agree that we've measured up to their trust in our vision and our values. The Odyssey, I hardly need to tell anybody here, is the story of a hero's journey, the building of character through overcoming the inevitable reverses of life, and the celebration, I'm now using Dr. E's words, of the classic American spirit. Indeed, it is that bestows on us the right and demands of us the duty to take ownership of our own lives. While a different saga, however, the Vanguard story, a very different saga, the Vanguard story is not without tangential parallels to Homer's timeless classic. At so many levels, then, Vanguard's saga of heroes, overstated as it may be, ties my story together with the study of entrepreneurship and technology in today's society. First, let me make it clear that I make no claim to being any kind of a hero, nor, in fact, do I have any particular claim on any qualities of leadership for myself. For as long as I can remember, all I've done is tried my best to take responsibility for the things I've touched along the road of life and to leave each thing better than I found it. Sure, I suppose that I have some of the qualities that are ascribed to leaders, the vision to the ideal, certainly, self-confidence and at least some self-awareness, a mind that, thanks to a wonderful education at Princeton, is probably above average, profound skepticism about the conventional wisdom of the day, and a determination to fight for the greater good, laboring in the interest of society as large as best we can in our imperfect way, and in particular, the interest of the investors of our land. While I'm about it, disclaiming, I might as well disclaim much ability as any kind of a manager or businessman, although I do hold to what I believe is the prime attribute of the successful manager. I've always trusted those around me with whom I've worked, and I've always done my best to honor their trust in me. In fact, I find, I'm sorry to say, more that I don't admire in the conduct of business today than what I do admire. I've loved, on that score, my active participation in the nonprofit world, notably in many years of service as chairman of the Board of Trustees at Blair Academy and as chairman of the National Constitution Center, which Ken Starr mentioned. Every bit as much I've loved them as I have in my now 55-year-old business career. Truth told, I often wish that some of the values of these public-spirited institutions, nonprofit institutions, could be reflected in the values of our business leaders. I've reveled in helping to build a better world there solely because, well, it seems like the right thing to do, not very complicated. Finally, one more disclaimer. While Vanguard is said to be the story of entrepreneurship, I'm not sure that I have any credentials as an entrepreneur. And what are you doing listening to me tonight? In fact, the creation of the firm resulted in the conversion of an existing firm, we'd have to go out and raise capital, to a new corporate structure, one that was specifically designed to provide no equity participation, nor any entrepreneurial reward to its creator or to its staff. Rather, the whole idea was to put service in the interest of our investors rather than service in the interest of our management as the firm's highest value, and operating in our own very peculiar way as a nonprofit enterprise. But even as I disclaim these credentials of the hero, the credentials of the leader, the credentials of the business manager, and even the credentials of the entrepreneur, I shamelessly present my best credential. I am an idealist, a shameless idealist. Even more, I'm an idealist who revels in the values of the Enlightenment and holds high his admiration for the brilliance and character of our great thinkers, our great doers, the great adventurers of the 18th century, Men, as it happens, in particular our nation's founding fathers, who gave birth to our modern world and our nation. I confess to being immensely proud of the title of one of the chapters of a biography of me that was written back in 1996, I think, published in 1996. The title of the chapter was The 18th Century Man. I took that as a great compliment. A year ago, in a talk on entrepreneurship that celebrated the 300th anniversary of Benjamin Franklin, I reflected on this 18th century connection, if you will, with a wonderful quotation. Soon, think about this one, soon we will know everything that the 18th century didn't know and nothing it did, and it will be hard to live with us. Think about that. These words were the opening epigram of Building a Bridge to the 18th Century by the late Neil Postman, prolific author, social critic, and professor at New York University. His book presented an impassioned defense of the old-fashioned liberal humanitarianism that was the hallmark of the Age of Reason. His aim was to restore the balance between mind and machine, and his principal concern was our move away from an era in which the values and character of Western civilization were at the forefront of the minds of our great philosophers and leaders, and in which the prevailing view was that anything that's truly important must have a moral authority. Just what you were saying, Dean Starr. By way of contrast, in our present era of information technology, numbers and scientific techniques seem to be at the forefront of what we call our values. Metaphorically speaking, if you can't count it, it doesn't count. Surely this change has been reflected clearly in the change in capitalism from this system with values like trust and being trusted, trusting and being trusted at the fore, to a system heavily relying on numbers. We seem to blindly accept that financial matters are rational simply because numbers, however dubious their provenance may be, are definitive. While Postman made the bold assertion that truth is invulnerable to fashion and the passing of time, I'm not so sure. Indeed, I would argue that we've moved away from truth, however one might define it, to, with due respects to Stephen Colbert, truthiness. Truthiness. The presentation of ideas and numbers that convey neither more nor less than what we wish to believe in our own self-interest and persuade others to believe it too. We manage our truth by managing our numbers. That old bromide, you probably know it, many of you, of the management consultant, if you can measure it, you can manage it, has done us far more harm than good. As the 21st century begins then, our values have changed, and it's hard to resist conformity with a new society in which seemingly everything can be measured. I would argue everything except that which is important. And even Vanguard has emerged as a sort of a prototypical 21st century firm, a virtual organization, enormous in size now, had 28 people at the start, now 12,000, heavily reliant on process, real-time communications, and computer technology, and managed largely by the contemporary numeric standards of modern management. But our core, I hope and believe, through my idealistic eyes, we remain a prototypical 18th century firm, thriving on that early entrepreneurship, on our simple investment strategies, and on eternal verities such as service to others before service to self, doing our best to hold high the belief that ethical principles and moral values must be, finally, the basis for any enterprise worth its salt. Now, in today's grandiose era of capitalism, the word entrepreneur has come to be commonly associated with those who are motivated to create new enterprises, largely by the desire for personal wealth or even greed. At best, entrepreneurship entails, however, something much more important than mere money. And I'll now repeat the words that Dean Starr mentioned from the book, but from Joseph Schumpeter, written nearly a century ago in The Theory of Economic Development. They're worth hearing twice. He dismissed material and monetary gains, the prime mover of the entrepreneur, finding motivations like these. Dean Starr, I love these words as much as you do. The joy of creating, of getting things done, of simply exercising one's ingenuity and energy. And two, the will to conquer, the impulse to fight, that's my favorite, to succeed for the sake not of the fruits of success, but of success itself. That's the way it actually was in 18th century America, at least in the case of Benjamin Franklin. Fairly described as America's first entrepreneur, for Franklin, the getting of money was always a means to an end, not an end to itself. You know this. The enterprises he created were designed for the public weal, not for his personal profit. When he joined with his colleagues in founding the Philadelphia Contributionship way back in 1752, an insurance company was a mutual company of all things, owned by its policyholders. This combination of ownership and service, creating a true mutuality of interest between the owners of a firm and its managers, was not then, nor is it now, the common mode of business organization. But the contributionship has survived to this day, and very few companies last for 250 years. Franklin also founded a library, an academy, a college, a hospital, a learned society, all for the benefit of the community. Not bad. And his inventions followed the same philosophy. He made no attempt to patent the lightning rod, and he declined the offer from the state of Pennsylvania for a patent on his Franklin stove, which revolutionized home heating in America, cutting greatly down on wood consumption, with great benefit to the public at large. Benjamin Franklin believed, I'm quoting here, that knowledge is not the property, the personal property of its discoverer, but the common property of all. As we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, he wrote, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by inventions of ours, and this we should do freely and generously. If it crosses your mind that Franklin's concepts of service for the greater good of the community and of creativity and innovation designed to improve the quality of life rather than for personal gain are rarer than they should be in today's wealth-driven, often greedy version of entrepreneurship, you have very good powers of observation. But however rare, examples exist. And truth told, the creation of Vanguard, like Franklin's contributionship, creating a mutuality of interest between client and manager, reflects the very same values that Franklin held high. Now, to the extent that the Odyssey of Vanguard is, or at least begins, as my story, let me tell you a little bit about it. I do so that you will see that no heroism is involved, that no giant brain drew the design, that the implementation of our strategy required little in the way of inordinate business skills. Each one of you, particularly you students here tonight, have been given the opportunities and determination that I have been given, and you can do the same. You need the opportunities, I'll admit that, in whatever calling that you all want to follow. In our case, simplicity rather than complexity called the tune. The relentless rules of humble arithmetic, a phrase from Justice Brandeis, overwhelmed the need for imponderable statistical proofs, and leaps of faith rather than hard evidence ruled the day. The idea that the shareholder, not the manager, should be king accounts for the lion's share of our growth. And it has been said of me, in fact, when I tell you how simple all this was, it's been said to me, not always in a kindly manner, that the only thing this poor guy has going for him is the uncanny ability to recognize the obvious. And so it is. That story begins, the Vanguard story, with the first of an almost infinite number of breaks that I'd been given during my long life. Came at Blair Academy, where thanks to a generous scholarship and a demanding job, first as a waiter and then as captain of the waiters, I received a terrific college preparatory education. I had no good education before that. That priceless advantage, in turn, presented me with another break with the help of another full scholarship and another full-time job waiting on tables and commons. It's occurred to me in later years I must have been a very good waiter. I entered Princeton University in the late summer of 1947. It was easier to get admitted then, and if you don't believe that, just ask Dr. E., who post-dates me by 40 years as a member of the class of 1991. And despite my hard-won academic success at Blair, I found the early going at Princeton tough. The low point came in the autumn of 1948 when I struggled with my first exposure to the field of economics. It was not a happy introduction to my major field of study, and my low grades almost cost me my scholarship, and hence my entire Princeton career, because I had not a sou of outside financial support. But I pressed on as best I could, and my grades gradually improved and the crisis passed. While academic distinction continued to elude me, it gets better, by the way, don't worry. Fate smiled down at me once again a year later, determined to write my senior thesis on a subject that no previous thesis had ever tackled, that's the contrarian in me, Adam Smith and Karl Marx and John Maynard Keynes were not on my list. But what topic should I choose? In one of the most fantastic appearances of luck in my life, I was perusing Fortune magazine in the reading room of the then brand new Firestone Library in December 1949. And an interesting twist, I hadn't thought about this, Dean Starr, that 50 years later, that's when they gave me this accolade of being some sort of a giant. So funny things can happen. But as I read Fortune, I paused on page 116 and began to read an article about a business which I never imagined. We had no money, we had no stocks and bonds, we got a lot of dunning for debts the Bogle family owned, and I didn't know anything about investing. But when the title of the article was Big Money in Boston, and described the mutual fund industry as tiny but contentious. And this callow and insecure, but very determined young kid decided that mutual funds would be the topic of his thesis. I entitled it The Economic Role of the Investment Company. There just isn't any question that many of the values I identified in that thesis would decades later prove to be at the very core of Vanguard's growth. Quote, the principal function of mutual funds is the management of their investment portfolios. Everything else is incidental. Future industry growth can be maximized by a reduction of sales loads and management fees. And with a final rhetorical flourish, funds should operate in that phrase I mentioned to you earlier in my remarks tonight, in the most efficient, honest, and economical way possible. Sophomoric idealism? You bet. Designed for the enterprise that would emerge a quarter century later? Who knows? I'll leave it to you to decide. But whatever was truly in my mind all those years ago, the thesis clearly put forth the proposition that the mutual fund shareholder ought to be given a fair shake. I threw myself into the task of writing that thesis with abandon. I fell madly in love with my subject. I was convinced that that tiny $2 billion industry of yore would become huge and would remain contentious. I was right on both counts. It is now, this industry, a $10 trillion colossus, the nation's largest financial institution. And what's more, the countless hours that I'd spent researching and analyzing the industry in my little Carroll and Firestone library was rewarded with a 1+, A+, and led to a magna cum laude diploma, a delightful, if totally unexpected, finale for my academic career at Princeton. Turnabout is fair play. Fate smiled on me yet again when Walter Morgan, the Princeton class of 1920, nice little college tie there, old school tie, and the founder of Wellington Fund, read my thesis. More luck. In his own words, quote, largely as a result of his thesis, we have added Mr. Bogle to our Wellington organization. Another stroke of luck. Although I agonized over the risks of going into this young business, my research had persuaded me that the industry's future would be bright, and I cast my lot with this great Princetonian, died at the age of 100. I knew him for 50 years, and I have never looked back. He had given me the opportunity of a lifetime. In 1965, Mr. Morgan had made it clear that I would be a successor. At that time, the company was lagging its peers, and he told me, quote, to do whatever it takes to solve our problems. Young and headstrong, with a self-confidence that belied my lack of wisdom and experience, I was then only 35 years old, I put together a merger with a high-flying group of 4 whiz kids who had achieved an extraordinary investment performance over the preceding 6 years. Such an approach, believing that past performance has the power to predict future performance, is of course antithetical to everything I believe today. It was a great but very expensive lesson. Together, we 5 whiz kids whizzed high for a few years, and then, of course, we whizzed low. The speculative fever in the stock market in the go-go era of the mid-1960s went. Just like the new economy bubble of the late 1990s, it burst and was followed by a 50% market decline. The once happy band of partners had a falling out, and in January 1974, I was deposed as head of what I had considered my company, and I was heartbroken. But necessity being the mother of invention, I decided to pursue an unprecedented course of action, definitely in my own self-interest. I've got a nice self-preservation instinct. The management company directors, management companies run all the funds, who fired me, composed only a minority, of the board of directors of Wellington Fund itself. So I went to the fund board with a novel proposal. Why don't we have the fund and its associated mutual funds, there were then 10, today there are more than 100 in the group, declare their independence from the manager and retain me as their full-time chairman and CEO. After a contentious debate that lasted 7 months, we won the battle to administer the funds on a truly mutual basis under which they would be operated at cost by their own wholly owned subsidiary. With only weeks to go before incorporation, we still had no name for the new firm. Fate, of course, you're probably getting used to this now, smiled again. By happenstance, as the battle for the fund board approval raged on, I stumbled across a book describing the historic Battle of the Nile, where Lord Nelson sank the entire French fleet and ended Napoleon's dream of world conquest. There was Nelson's triumphant dispatch from his flagship, HMS Vanguard. The words in that dispatch, the proud naval tradition, and the great victory, combined with the leading-edge implication of the name Vanguard, were more than I could resist. So on September 24th, 1974, the Vanguard Group was born. Ironically, without the 1951 hiring, which providentially brought me into this business, and the 1974 firing, which abruptly took me out of it, there would be no Vanguard today. I'm fond of saying that I left my old job at Wellington the same way I began my new job at Vanguard. Fired with enthusiasm. You have to think about that one for a minute. Time does not permit me, this paragraph is in here for Elliot, time does not permit me to describe in detail the Vanguard Odyssey that was to follow our fortuitous launch in 1974. But its parallels to Homer's Odyssey, while hardly exact, are nonetheless there. We've wasted time with our own lotus eaters, Elliot. We've been enticed by our own wily sirens. We've sailed uneasily between Scylla and Charybdis. We've brazenly defied more than one Cyclops. We've been threatened by the wrath of our own Poseidon. And we've been temporarily entranced by some very bewitching Calypsos. But we've survived our 32-year voyage and returned home proud and prosperous. For a brief moment of reflection. And of course we know that life is a journey and not a destination, and that a new Odyssey always lies ahead. As you might imagine, it's difficult for me to believe that such a new voyage could have the excitement, it's impossible for me to believe it really, and challenge of Vanguard's first one. After all, putting a new name on the map, creating a new structure, unique, establishing a new set of ethical values, can't occur over and over again. Whether it was true entrepreneurship or not, and I leave that one to you, we did create a new form of governance in the fund industry, a mutual structure in which the interest of managers the interest of fund investors take precedence over the interest of managers and distributors. We then formed the world's first index fund, a passive portfolio designed simply to provide the returns provided by the stock market itself, a challenge that precious few portfolio managers have measured up to over time. We developed a new paradigm for bond fund management using an innovative three-tier structure of long-term, short-term, and intermediate-term portfolios, not very imaginative, but it became the industry standard overnight. And we abandoned, also overnight, a proven broker-dealer, commission-oriented, supply push distribution system in favor of a new and totally untried, no sales load, demand pull system for self-motivated investors. None of these changes that we all take for granted today came easily. To get them done required a devil-may-care attitude, a blasé disregard for risk, a profound conviction without any hard evidence that they would work, and the sheer energy required to get it all done. And what's more, they were contentious. Contentious, that word you heard before from tiny but contentious industry. Despite what we regarded as our noble intentions in putting this new structure together, the completion was initially opposed by our industry's regulator, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. They turned down our ability to run Vanguard. And they dawdled over our appeal to do so for 4 long years. And when it finally gave us its unanimous approval in 1981, it came with a nice bonus and what I would call a snappy salute. Quote from the SEC unanimously, "The Vanguard plan actually furthers the 1940 Act's an Investment Company Act of 1940's objectives and promotes a healthy and viable mutual fund complex in which each fund can better prosper. That after 4 years of rejection. And prosper we did. By the time the SEC finally gave us the green light in 1981, 7 long years after we began, the stock market had begun to recover and our assets doubled from $1.4 billion to $3 billion. They would double again with remarkable regularity approximately every 3 years. In 1983, $6 billion, 1985, $12 billion, 1986, $24 billion, 1989, $50 billion, 1992, $100 billion, 1995, $200 billion, and again to $400 billion in 1998. Remarkable. Well, it took longer, in fact 7 more years, for assets to double yet again. We crossed the $800 billion mark in 2004, and today we oversee $1.1 trillion of other people's money. That mighty engine that has driven that amazing growth was powered largely by our simple group of index funds, those structured bond funds I mentioned, and our money market funds, each providing a near causal relationship, obvious relationship, between low cost and high returns. The assets of these funds themselves, the bond, the money market, and the index, comprise nearly $800 billion, actually more than $800 billion, or 3/4 of our asset base. What's more, we apply those same index principles to substantially all of the remainder of assets, largely actively managed equity funds. That is to say, emphasis on rock-bottom expenses, minimal portfolio turnover, no sales loads, with diversified investment quality portfolios, and clearly defined objectives and strategies. That's across the board at Vanguard, pretty much across the board. Most important in the marketplace of intelligent long-term investors, individual, institutional alike, our strategies have worked very effectively for those whom we serve. The returns earned by our funds are consistently ranked near the top of our industry, but no matter who's doing the ranking, most recently by Global Investor #1. It's fair to say, I think, that Vanguard has represented an artistic success for our fund shareholders and a commercial success for our firm, and we have never been copied despite that. So the Odyssey has not only been long and arduous, it has been exhilarating and rewarding. Now, if I may, when I think of the good fortune that has brought me to where I am this evening, I give the highest credit to a set of strong family values, if I may say so, a faith in God, a fine preparation for college at Blair Academy, and the powerful reinforcement and new awakening I received through a liberal education at Princeton University. A few years ago, former President Harold Shapiro of Princeton defined these 2 aims of a liberal education. Quote, "One is the importance of achieving educational objectives, a better understanding of our cultural inheritance in ourselves, a familiarity with the foundations of mathematics and science, and a clarification of what we mean by virtue. The other is the importance of molding a certain type of citizen, one who is engaged in the search for truth and new understanding, the freeing of the individual from previous ideas, the pursuit of alternative ideas, the development of integrity and the power of reason of individual goals, and the preparation for an independent and responsible life of choice." President Shapiro emphasized the responsibility of the university, and I know you know this probably as well as anybody in America right here, of offering a liberal education to provide its students with a moral education, helping them to develop values that will enrich their lives as individuals and as members of society. During my 4 years there, I did my terribly imperfect best to acquire these values and to manifest themselves in my activities in the many years that have followed. As I look back in hindsight on my life, with glasses that have an inevitably rosy hue, I can only say that the liberal and moral education that was placed before me at Princeton may well have ignited some deep, and I guess you'd say unimagined, spark that began to influence my life and my career in the mutual fund field. This spark, nurtured by time and experience, then erupted into some sort of a flame, one that has permeated my ideas about the proper nature of the mutual fund. That flame, although it hasn't spread very far now, will spread one day to this industry and I guarantee you it will become a blaze, and it will not be easy to extinguish. It is my prayer that my mission, my crusade, if you will, if that's too lofty a characterization, will help this industry rethink its values and accordingly be of greater service to millions of American investors, tens of millions. Serving these new owners of American business who are contributing to the highest values of our system of capital formation, even as they strive to take personal responsibility for the security of their own financial futures, has been a marvelously worthwhile life's work, and I have been infinitely blessed. It's wonderfully ironic that the very same 1949 issue of Fortune that inspired my thesis included a feature essay entitled, of all things, The Moral History of U.S. Business. Sad to relate, I have no recollection of reading it in 1949. I got to be truthful, you know. But I did read it a few years ago. Someone got me a mint condition of that Fortune magazine, one of our crew members. And I did read it a few years ago, a half century later. And as I reflected on Vanguard's guiding principles of prudent investing and personal service, both seem to me to be related to the kind of moral responsibility of business that was expressed in that ancient Fortune essay. The essay began by noting that the profit motive is hardly the only motive that lie behind the labors of the American businessman. Other motives include, I'm quoting from the article here, the love of power or prestige, altruism, pugnacity, patriotism, and the hope of being remembered through a product or institution. Yes, all of the above, and I freely confess to all of those motives. Life is too short to be a hypocrite. And I also agree with the Fortune in that essay on the appropriateness of the traditional tendency of American society to ask, what are the moral credentials for the social power the businessman wields? It has some old-time quotes in that article. It quotes the words of Quaker businessman John Woolman of New Jersey, who in 1770 wrote, "It is good to advise people to take such things as were most useful and not costly." It cites Benjamin Franklin's favorite words, industry and frugality, as the best means of producing wealth and receiving virtue. And I really love this one. Moving to 1844, the essay cites William Parsons, a merchant with these wonderful words, who describes the good, he was a merchant, describes the merchant of probity, and he describes the good merchant with the following wonderful words, quote, "An enterprising man willing to run some risks, yet not willing to risk in hazardous enterprises the property of others entrusted to his keeping. Careful to indulge no extravagance, and to be simple and unostentatious in its habits. Not merely, think of these words, not merely a merchant, but a man with a mind to improve, a heart to cultivate, and a character to form." These demands, uttered more than 160 years ago, were not only wonderful words, but when I read them, I think and thought they were directed right at me. As for the mind, even at my age, I still strive every day, I really do, to improve my own mind, reading, reflecting, and challenging even my own deep-seated beliefs. As for the heart, no one could possibly revel in the opportunity to create it more than I, because just 6 days ago, after all, I marked the 11th anniversary of the amazing grace represented by the incredibly successful heart transplant that I received in 1996. And as for character, whatever moral standard I may have developed, I've tried to invest my own soul and spirit in the character of that little firm I founded all those years ago. On a far grander scale than just one human life, these standards of mind, of heart, and of character resonate as ever idealistically in how we seek to manage the billions of dollars entrusted to Vanguard's stewardship, and in how I pray that my company will ever see itself putting the will and the work of a business enterprise in the service of others. Perhaps it's obvious these values eventually inspired me to expand my horizons beyond the narrow confines of the mutual fund industry in which I've spent my entire career. The result, of course, is The Battle for the Soul of Capitalism, published by Yale, yes, Yale University Press in 2005, our big rivals. In essence, Battle is my cri de coeur, no pun intended, about the state of American capitalism and the state of American society today. It is one idealistic book. Just consider its first words with the dedication to my 12 grandchildren and the other fine young citizens of their generation. With 6 of these grandchildren now in college, all you students here, I think mostly back there, are part of that generation and hence part of this dedication. My generation, I'm reading the dedication in its entirety, has left America with much to be set right. You have the opportunity of a lifetime to fix what has been broken. Hold high your idealism and your values. Remember that even one person can make a difference, and do your part to begin the world anew. A single turn of the page takes you to 5 epigraphs, count them 5, the first of which comes from St. Paul. If the sound of the trumpet shall be uncertain, who shall prepare himself to the battle? And in my acknowledgments, I get right to the point in the very first paragraph. Capitalism has been moving in the wrong direction. The introduction that follows doesn't let up. I start off with a remarkably light revision of the classic first paragraph of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, adapted to the present era. You'd be amazed how little change that took. Here's Gibbon's first sentence and then mine. Gibbon, in the 2nd century of the Christian era, the empire of Rome comprehended the fairest part of the earth, first sentence in Gibbon's book, and the most civilized portion of mankind. Rewritten in battle, as the 20th century of the Christian era ended, the United States of America comprehended the most powerful position on earth and the wealthiest portion of mankind. So when I add Gibbon's conclusion, yet the Roman Empire would decline and fall, a revolution which will be ever remembered and still felt by the nations of the earth, I'm confident the thoughtful readers do not miss the point. That didn't bother me. I hammered it home anyway. Gibbon's history reminds us that no nation can take its greatness for granted. There are no exceptions. As one of 2 reviews, both very generous, of the battle that appeared in the New York Times noted, subtle Mr. Bogle is not. You may be sensing that. I'm not writing off America. I would never do that. But my certain trumpet is a warning that we better put our house in order. The example of the fall of the Roman Empire, quoting from the book, my book, ought to be a strong wake-up call to all of those who share my respect and admiration for the vital role that capitalism has played in America's call to greatness. Thanks to our marvelous economic system, based on private ownership of productive facilities, on prices set in free markets, on personal freedom, we are the most prosperous society in history, the most powerful nation on the face of the globe, and most important of all, the highest exemplar of values that sooner or later are shared by the human beings of all nations, the inalienable right to, yes, you heard it here, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But something went wrong. By the later years of the 20th century, our business values had eroded to a remarkable extent. The greed, egotism, materialism, and waste that seem almost endemic in today's version of capitalism, the huge and growing disparity in our nation between the haves and the have-nots, poverty and lack of education, our misuse of the world's natural resources, the corruption of our political system by corporate money, all are manifestations of a system gone awry. And here's where the soul of capitalism comes in. The book reads, the human soul, as Thomas Aquinas defined it, is the form of the body, the vital power animating, pervading, and shaping an individual from the moment of conception, drawing all of the energies of life into a unity. And in our temporal world, I argue, the soul of capitalism is that same vital power that has animated, pervaded, and shaped our economic system, drawing all of its energies into a unity. In this sense, it is no overstatement to describe the effort we must make to return the system to its proud roots with these words, the battle to restore the soul of capitalism. One reviewer of the book thought the title was, well, inflated, but he liked the book anyway, so I guess that's all right. That idealism doesn't let up. The reader doesn't even finish chapter 1, the first page. What went wrong in corporate America before reading? At the root of the problem, in the broadest sense, was a societal change, aptly described by these words from the teacher, Joseph Campbell. In medieval times, as you approached the city, your eye was taken by the cathedral. Today, it's the towers of commerce. It's business, business, business. We had become what Campbell had called a bottom-line society. But a society came to measure the wrong bottom line in many, many ways. My words now, not Campbell's. Form over substance, prestige over virtue, money over achievement, charisma over character, the ephemeral over the enduring, and even mammon over God. That may seem like a harsh indictment, but I don't back away from it. Indeed, as International Herald Tribune columnist William Pfaff described it, what went wrong was a pathological mutation in capitalism. The classic system, owner's capitalism, had been based on serving the interests of the corporation's owners, but a new system developed, manager's capitalism, in which the corporations came to be run to profit its managers in complicity, if not in conspiracy, with accountants and the managers of other corporations. Why did it happen? In Pfaff's words, because the markets had so diffused corporate ownership that no responsible owner exists. This is morally unacceptable, he concluded, but also a corruption of capitalism itself. If you've read the book, as you students have, you'll know there were two reasons for this baneful change. First, the ownership society, the old ownership society, in which the shares of our corporations were held almost entirely by individual shareholders, direct holders of stock, gradually lost its heft and effectiveness. The direct ownership of stocks by individuals in the U.S. dropped from 92% in 1950 to 32% currently, while indirect ownership by financial institutions has soared from 8% to 68%. The ownership society is gone, and it is never going to return. In its place, we have a new agency society in which financial intermediaries now hold effective control of American business. But these new agents haven't behaved as owners or agents should. Our corporations and pension managers and mutual fund managers have too often put their own financial interests ahead of their interests of their principals, PALS, those 100 million families who are the ultimate owners of our mutual funds and beneficiaries of our pension plan. As Adam Smith wisely put it 200 years ago, quote, "The managers of other people's money rarely watch over it with the same anxious vigilance with which they watch over their own. They very easily give themselves a dispensation, and negligence and profusion must always prevail. And so negligence and profusion among our corporate directors and money managers have prevailed in present-day America." The second reason, first being that agents aren't serving their principals, is that these new investor agents not only seem to ignore the interest of their principals, but they seem to forget their own investment principles. I've moved from PAL to PLE here. By the latter part of the 20th century, the predominant focus of institutional investing had turned from the wisdom of long-term investing to the folly of short-term speculation. During the recent era, we entered the age of expectations investing, where projected growth in corporate earnings, especially earnings guidance and its subsequent achievement by fair means or foul, became the watchword of investors. Never mind the reported earnings were too often a product of financial engineering that served the short-term interests of both the corporate managers and Wall Street security analysts. But when long-term owners of stocks become short-term renters of stocks, and when the momentary precision of the price of the stock takes precedence over the eternal vagueness of the intrinsic value of the corporation, concern about corporate governance is the first casualty. The single most important job of the corporate director is to assure that management is creating value for shareholders. Yet investors seem not to care when that goal became secondary. I ask, if the owners of the corporate America don't give a damn about corporate governance, who on earth should? And so in corporate America, we have these increases in executive compensation unjustified by corporate performance and grotesquely disproportionate to pathetically small increase in real inflation-adjusted compensation of the average worker. We have financial engineering that dishonors the idea of financial statement integrity. Again, if you can measure it, you can manage it, writ large. And the failure of traditional gatekeepers we rely on to oversee corporate management, our auditors, our regulators, our legislators, our directors. And in investment America, the agent owners who now control corporate America don't even seem to care. While we own 68% of all stocks, all we hear from money managers in governance issues is the sound of silence. Not only are they more likely to be short-term speculators than long-term investors, but they are, of course, managing the pension and thrift plans for all those corporations whose stocks they hold and are faced with a serious conflict of interest when proxy issues are concerned. No mutual fund has ever put in a proxy opposed by management, ever, once. As one manager has reportedly said, there are only two types of clients we don't want to offend: actual and potential. And that's a lot of clients. And in mutual fund America, our industry has lost its way. Once a profession with elements of a business, mutual funds have become a business with elements of a profession and too few elements at that. When I came into this business, it was dominated by small, privately held organizations run by investment professionals. Now, the mutual fund industry is dominated by giant, publicly held conglomerates run by businessmen hell-bent on earning a return on the capital invested by their own firm rather than the capital invested by their fund shareholders. Result, I think this may be my only big statistic, over the past 20 years, the typical mutual fund investor has captured one quarter, less than one quarter, 27%, just more than one quarter, 27% of the compound real inflation-adjusted return on stocks that was there for the taking by simply holding the U.S. stock market portfolio through an index fund. I'm speaking, of course, of the Vanguard 500 index, not to be commercial, it's the only fund that existed for 20 years, index fund. It must seem obvious it's time to face up to these other failures in the changing world of capitalism. But you read the papers like I do. Despite the contentious nature of all these issues I've described, broadly reflecting the triumph of the economic interests of the oligarchs of American business and finance over the interests of our nation's last-line investors, it is really remarkable that so little public discourse has been in evidence. In the investment community, I have seen no defense, maybe you have, of the inadequate returns delivered by mutual funds through investors, nor of our industry's truly bizarre counterproductive ownership structure. No attempt by institutions to explain why the rights of ownership that one would think are implicit in holding shares of stock remain largely unexercised, and no serious criticism of the virtually unrecognized turn away from the once conventional and pervasive investment strategies that relied on, yes, the wisdom of long-term investing, towards strategies that rely increasingly on the folly of short-term speculation. If the battle helps to open the door to the introspection and then corrected action by our corporate and financial leaders, well, maybe we can hasten those changes. This process, I conclude, must begin with a return to the original values of capitalism and to that virtuous circle of integrity, trusting and being trusted. When ethical values go out the window and service to those whom we are duty-bound to serve is superseded by service to help, the whole idea of the capitalism that's been a moving force in the creation of our society's abundance is soured. In the era that lies ahead, then, the trusted businessman, the prudent fiduciary, and the honest steward must again be the paradigms of our great American enterprises. I know it won't be easy, but if we all work long enough and hard enough at the task, we can build out of our long-gone ownership society and our failed agency society a new fiduciary society in which the citizens and investors of America at last receive that fair shake they have always deserved from our corporation, our investment system, and our mutual fund industry. And so this saga of entrepreneurship that can still be built by focusing on human values rather than on the accumulation of personal wealth staggers to its conclusion. To reiterate, the saga is at least tangentially related to Homer's Odyssey, that happily still resonates in our literature, the hero's journey through triumph and disaster over and over again. The Odyssey at Vanguard, while it's different, is nonetheless a throwback to today's misguided bottom-line society, as well as a reaffirmation of the inspiring moral values of the 18th century, values that belie today's pervasive retreat from yesterday's solid foundation of capitalism. At the same time, we seem to me to be losing our bearings as a nation and a society, focusing much more on the tools of success, what we can see and count, facts and figures, courses about the superficial, and ignoring the truly essential tools of higher learning, such as intellectual curiosity, the role and rule of reason, moral vision, generosity of spirit, even open-mindedness, self-denial, and integrity. So what's to be done? Well, each of us must do our part. Everybody here tonight can help me prove that even one person can make a difference. Returning to the theme of Vanguard's saga of heroes, Brad McQuaid reminded us in the final sentence of that New York Times Arts and Leisure article, "These games should never be finished, nor should your Odyssey or my Odyssey be over, so long as our minds improve, our hearts beat, and our character strengthens." Life being life and death being death, I think we must nonetheless press on regardless as long as we can, and stay the course as long as the race continues. Those two phrases, stay on, press on regardless, and stay the course, that I've repeated ad infinitum to my colleagues at Vanguard. But even as I asked all of you, students as well as the older generation here, as I did my grandchildren in dedication to battle, to enlist in the mission of building a better world, I personally remain eager for the excitement of the chase, the idealism of a cause worth betting one's life on, and the joy of honoring the values of the past as the key to a brilliant future. So, particularly, again, to the students, dream your dreams, but act on them too. Action, always action is required in the everyday odyssey that each of our lives must follow, ever dangerous odyssey that each of our lives must follow. Be a good human being. Respect tradition and study the great thinkers of our heritage. And not only hear me, but reflect on what I've been trying to say this evening. I now close with a brief quotation, fairly brief quotation, with some words from Tennyson's Ulysses. As we found out, Eliot found out for me, I said, how did we get from Odysseus to Ulysses? Well, one is the Greek formulation and the other is the Roman formulation. And Tennyson's poem was called Ulysses, that may explain to you, if I may, far better than anything I could with my own words, the exciting adventures I've enjoyed, the conflicting emotions I've endured, and the single-minded determination on which I've tried to reflect with as much honesty as I could this evening, as I await, always with eager anticipation, the still unwritten final chapters of my long career. Ulysses in the poem begins by reflecting on his Odyssey. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that love me and alone. I am become a name. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers. And then he thinks what may lie ahead. I am part of all that I have met. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. And this gray spirit yearning and desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. Old age has yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note, may yet be done. And then, determined to take on one final mission, Ulysses summons his followers. So come, my friend, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, he says to his oarsmen, and sitting well in order smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset till I die. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now the strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, renewed by time and faith, still strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. So to each of you here tonight, particularly you students, with nearly all of your own Odyssey before you, unknown, this chronicle of my own past is probably irrelevant, because our task, yours and mine, is to live not the lives of others, but the lives of our own. But wherever you are in your own Odyssey, I know it holds the promise of being an exciting and rewarding one, if only you remain strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So there we are. I don't know if anybody, I mean, the hour's a little bit late. Elliot, I said to Elliot is 52 minutes too long. I think I came about that. And he said, no, do even longer. Well, not quite, but he said that would be fine, so I hope it's fine with all of you. And if anybody wants to throw in a few questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And if everybody thinks it might be time to go home to bed, I would be glad to honor that too. Yes, ma'am.
What luck are you having with your charities and trying to bring the business into charities and making them more efficient?
Well, actually, as I said in my talk, I think we can probably learn more from our charities than they can learn from us. But I'm kind of a financial guy. When we started the Constitution Center, a big part of any chairman's job is to first make sure we have the resources to do things. I mean, if you don't have the resources, you can't do it. And so when we started the Constitution Center, for example, it's a $180 million project, we raised a $40 million endowment fund. And at Blair, when I came on the board, and I did some, I've been pretty generous considering my circumstances with Blair. When I came on the board in 1970, they had an endowment of $800,000, which we had to borrow every summer to get us through until the tuition payments started to come in September. And we now have a $62 million endowment. It's not large, but it's a lot better than $800,000. But I think the main thing is to have a chief executive officer who's the true leader. The chairman is not, and just encourage him to follow all the sound business principles. Good accounting, good financial reporting, a little foresight about where revenues are coming from. We have strategic plans, both at Blair and the National Constitution Center. And it's just kind of going out about it like it was a business, but realizing it's something much more important than a business. So, a lot of everybody knows it's involved in philanthropy, but a lot of it is making sure you get the commitment of the community to support these worthwhile enterprises. So that's kind of the missionary zeal, conviction that the mission is a good one, rather than, I think most of them are not that badly operating efficiently, to be honest. Yes, ma'am. Well, first, you're very welcome, but I believe all that. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind here. Do I believe what I'm telling you tonight? You better believe I believe it. So, I'm happy to do it, and I particularly like to have a chance to talk to the students because it really works. Good ethics is, in fact, good business. Sometimes you need to have a thick skin and a long horizon, but good ethics is, in fact, the only basis for any enterprise worth its salt in the long run. Yes, sir. Rob?
As the world business becomes so global, what sense do you have that these principles will be used globally?
That's a very good question. I'll repeat it because I'm not sure. I should have repeated the other ones. What is the possibility as the world becomes more and more global, that the kind of principles I'm talking about will be able to be assimilated in global business? First, I think we have a lot of work to do to assimilate them into American business. And as I've made very clear, we have a lot of work to do, much more than anything else, focusing on the long-term success of an enterprise rather than the short-term price of the stock. And as I think everybody in the room knows, global standards are very different than ours in some of the nations of the world, particularly the less developed nations. Bribery, just highway robbery or bribery, whatever you want to call it, is just a rule of life. And it's going to take a long, long time to create the kind of institutions that we're blessed with here in the United States of America, that legal protections, shareholder rights, and conducts, high standards of conduct to develop around the world. It seems to me, and I feel this very strongly, that in the long run for a business enterprise to succeed, whether it's a mutual fund business or any other business, if you don't put the interest of the clients first, it's not going to be a successful enterprise in the long run. My God, that can be so false in the short run that I'm embarrassed to even talk about it. But in the long run, the greatest rewards come from doing that. So I think it's going to require a lot of patience, a lot of determination, a lot of discipline to make sure when we go out into these other lands that we observe the kind of standards that are best for that we observe typically here in the United States. And that's not easy to do. You know, when an American businessman is in a less developed country and he knows that if he wants to get the business, he's got to bribe some public officials. That's a pretty tough smoke. So, I mean, I guess it's time and patience. The first of which I obviously don't have much left, and the second of which I exhausted decades ago. Oh, God, give me patience and give it to me now. Well, listen, you've all been wonderful, and thank you so much for coming out. I've enjoyed being with you.
Jack, let me express the sentiment here in this room. We want to thank you so much for coming out here. We thank you for your idealism, for the rigor of your analysis, for the guts and courage to launch Bogle's Folly, and for the perseverance through good times and bad. And you've enriched the lives of millions of Americans morally and also financially. And for that, we're all in your debt. And thank you for coming out here. And this is a token of our appreciation.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. Thank you. Good night.